Have you ever wondered what would happen if humanity stopped believing in God? Not simply stopped attending church, not simply stopped praying, but truly stopped believing that there exists a higher authority above human beings, a source of meaning, a source of morality, a source of truth itself. Most people assume the answer would be simple. Society would continue, life would go on, people would adapt. But one philosopher believed the consequences would be far more profound, far more dangerous, and perhaps even catastrophic. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and more than a century ago, he made a declaration so shocking that it continues to echo through modern civilization. God is dead. For many people, these words sound like a celebration, a victory cry against religion, the triumphant announcement of atheism. But what if nearly everyone misunderstood what Nietzsche was actually trying to say? What if God is dead was never a celebration, but a warning? Because Nietzsche was not asking whether God existed. He was asking something much more terrifying. What happens to human beings after they stop believing? What happens when the foundation beneath an entire civilization begins to disappear? To understand why this question haunted Nietzsche, we must first understand the role God played throughout human history. For thousands of years, civilizations built their understanding of reality around divine authority. Morality came from God, justice came from God, meaning came from God, purpose came from God. Even suffering had an explanation. Life was not random. Existence was not meaningless. Human beings saw themselves as part of a larger story. A cosmic narrative that gave significance to both triumph and tragedy. Whether rich or poor, powerful or powerless, every person occupied a place within a divine order. This belief provided something psychology now recognizes as one of humanity's deepest needs. Meaning, because human beings can endure extraordinary suffering when they believe that suffering serves a purpose, but remove purpose, and suffering becomes unbearable. Nietzsche believed modern society was slowly destroying this foundation. Science was advancing, religious certainty was weakening, ancient beliefs were being questioned. And for the first time in history, large numbers of people were beginning to view the universe not as a divine creation, but as a vast, indifferent machine, a universe without inherent purpose, without ultimate meaning, without objective morality. Most people saw this as progress. Nietzsche saw something else. He saw a psychological earthquake. Because if God disappears, then what becomes of morality? Who decides what is good? Who decides what is evil? What prevents truth from becoming merely opinion? What prevents power from becoming the only authority left? These questions would become the center of Nietzsche's philosophy, and they remain some of the most important questions of modern civilization. Because contrary to popular belief, Nietzsche did not think human beings would automatically become free after abandoning God. He believed many would become lost. For centuries, religion had provided a framework for understanding existence. Suddenly removing that framework created a vacuum. And human beings do not tolerate vacuums for very long. Something always rushes in to replace what has been removed. This is why Nietzsche's most famous statement did not end with the words, "God is dead." It continued, "And we have killed him." In other words, humanity itself had dismantled the belief system that once gave meaning to Western civilization, but humanity had not yet figured out what would replace it. And that uncertainty terrified him, because Nietzsche understood something many people still struggle to understand today. Destroying an old system is easier than creating a new one. Questioning meaning is easier than finding meaning. Rejecting values is easier than creating values. And this is where Nietzsche believed humanity would face its greatest challenge. The challenge of nihilism. Nihilism is often misunderstood as pessimism, but Nietzsche saw it as something much deeper. The gradual realization that the values people once trusted may no longer have any objective foundation. The suspicion that life itself may possess no inherent purpose. The fear that existence may ultimately be indifferent to human hopes, dreams, and struggles. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that every map humanity ever created was wrong, every direction uncertain, every destination questionable. This was the psychological crisis Nietzsche believed modern civilization was entering, and in many ways, it is a crisis we continue to experience today. Look around. Rates of anxiety rise. Depression spreads. People possess more information than ever before, yet often feel less certain about meaning. Technology advances at extraordinary speed, but many still struggle to answer the most fundamental question of all. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What makes life meaningful? Nietzsche saw these questions coming long before the modern world existed. But he did not stop there, because Nietzsche believed the death of God would trigger another transformation. A transformation inside human beings themselves. If morality no longer comes from heaven, then where does it come from? Who creates values? Who determines meaning? Nietzsche's answer was radical. Human beings themselves. He believed humanity would eventually need to become the creator of its own values rather than relying upon inherited traditions. And this idea led to one of his most controversial concepts, the will to power. Many people misunderstand this phrase. They imagine dictators, conquerors, and tyrants. But Nietzsche's idea was far more psychological. Believed human beings possess a deep drive, not merely to survive, but to expand, to grow, to overcome, to transform themselves, to become more than they currently are. Every achievement, every creation, every act of self-improvement, every attempt to leave a mark upon the world reflects this deeper force. The desire to transcend limitation, the desire to matter, the desire to become. But Nietzsche also recognized a danger. The will to power can create greatness, but it can also create domination. It can inspire creativity, but it can also fuel destruction. Without wisdom, the pursuit of power can become an obsession, an endless hunger that consumes the person chasing it. And this brings us to another of Nietzsche's most famous ideas, the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman, or the Superman. Unfortunately, this concept has been misunderstood for generations. Nietzsche was not describing a biological superior race, nor was he describing a political ruler. He was describing a psychological ideal, a human being capable of creating meaning in a world where traditional certainties have collapsed. Someone who does not blindly follow the crowd. Someone who refuses to inherit values without examination. Someone strong enough to face reality without comforting illusions. The Übermensch represents humanity's attempt to rise above nihilism, to become the author of one's own existence, to transform freedom from a burden into a responsibility. But this responsibility is far heavier than most people realize. Because creating meaning is far more difficult than receiving it. Freedom sounds beautiful until you realize it means becoming responsible for your own values, your own purpose, your own direction, your own identity. And many people discover that certainty is psychologically comforting, even when that certainty is flawed. This may explain why modern societies repeatedly replace old belief systems with new ones. Ideologies, political movements, consumer culture, celebrity worship, nationalism, status, technology. The human need for meaning never disappears. It simply changes form. And perhaps this was Nietzsche's deepest insight. Human beings cannot live without something to believe in. If God disappears, something else inevitably takes his place. The real question is whether the replacement will elevate humanity or destroy it. This is why Nietzsche remains so relevant today, not because he answered every question, but because he forced humanity to confront questions many would rather avoid. What happens when old truths collapse? Can morality survive without divine authority? Can meaning exist without God? Can freedom become a source of purpose rather than confusion? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of civilization emerges after the death of its highest values? More than a century has passed since Nietzsche asked these questions. Yet they feel more relevant than ever, because the world he predicted is, in many ways, the world we now inhabit. A world searching for meaning, a world questioning truth, a world struggling to define morality, a world attempting to replace what it has abandoned. And perhaps that is why Nietzsche continues to provoke fascination today. Not because he killed God, but because he understood the consequences of a world that believes God is gone. The philosopher who declared that God was dead was not standing at the end of a story. He was standing at the beginning of one. The beginning of humanity's search for meaning after certainty, a search that continues to this very day. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is that Nietzsche believed the future would be shaped by how humanity answers a single question. If the old source of meaning has disappeared, what will replace it?